Trump says there's only a 50-50 chance of sealing a trade deal with Europe, and even less with Canada. That stark admission, published in late July, sent ripples through markets and capitals on both sides of the Atlantic. For Canadians, it was a reminder of how fragile economic ties had become with their largest trading partner. For Americans, it was a warning that Trump's tariff-first strategy was cornering allies as well as rivals. The stakes are high, supply chains disrupted, consumer prices rising, and alliances strained to the breaking point. So the question is, how did neighbors become adversaries in a fight neither can easily win? For decades, the United States and Canada enjoyed what many called a golden era of trade relations. The North American Free Trade Agreement, launched in 1994, created seamless cross-border flows of goods, capital, and labor. Truckloads of auto parts moved daily across Detroit and Windsor without second thought, fueling an integrated North American auto industry. Agricultural exports from the Canadian prairies fed American markets, while U.S. technology and financial services expanded north. By the early 2000s, over 75% of Canada's exports went to the United States, reflecting a deep economic embrace. But as the global economy shifted, cracks began to show. The 2008 financial crisis exposed vulnerabilities in cross-border supply chains. Rising populism in the U.S. rekindled debates about America First policies, questioning whether free trade truly benefited ordinary Americans. Even before Trump's return to the White House in 2025, his first administration had already renegotiated NAFTA into the USMCA, a deal seen in Ottawa as more restrictive. Canada felt the pinch from Washington's sporadic steel and aluminum tariffs, justified on national security grounds that many Canadians viewed as absurd. At the same time, Canada began diversifying, pursuing agreements like CETA with the European Union. While these were steps toward economic independence, the heavy reliance on U.S. markets made full decoupling nearly impossible. When Trump ramped up rhetoric on tariffs in his second term, warning that allies like Canada could face the same pressure as rivals like China, it was clear the golden era was over. What had once been a model of cooperation was sliding into an uneasy partnership, one where trust was fraying and economic nationalism loomed large on both sides. Trump's second term put tariffs at the heart of U.S. economic policy. In early 2025, he declared that no ally or rival would be exempt from his drive to rebalance trade. Canada, long treated as a partner, suddenly faced suspicion. The logic in Washington was political as much as economic. Rust Belt towns, hollowed out by decades of offshoring, demanded protection. Tariffs became the administration's symbol of sovereignty, promising to bring jobs home. In March, the White House imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian aluminum, steel, and farm goods, plus 10% on energy. Claiming national security, it grouped Canada with rivals like China, a shock for Ottawa, which supplied nearly half of U.S. aluminum imports. Trump expanded threats to pharmaceuticals, floating duties of up to 200%. Critics warned this would drive up costs for Americans dependent on Canadian drugs. Simultaneously, Washington sent letters to 22 governments demanding concessions and guaranteed U.S. purchases. The strategy polarized opinion. Some U.S. steelmakers welcomed protection, but automakers sounded alarms. Cross-border supply chains meant tariffs acted like multiple taxes. Economists warned consumers would eventually foot the bill. Trump ignored critics. At rallies, he cast tariffs as patriotism. Canada and Europe have taken advantage of us for too long. To him, tariffs were not just leverage, but a crusade. Yet behind the rhetoric, strains on America's closest ally deepened, with unpredictable consequences. Ottawa hit back within days. Canada imposed 25% tariffs on billions of U.S. goods, targeting politically sensitive exports like farm produce and household items. Prime Minister Mark Carney escalated further, charting a path of diversification. In June 2025, Canada signed a landmark defense pact with the EU, part military, part economic. Carney pledged to raise defense spending to 2% of GDP immediately, with a path to 5% by 2030, and began exploring European alternatives to US weapons. At home, the stance resonated. Nearly half of Canadians backed diversification, even at a cost. Farmers and manufacturers hurt by tariffs voiced anger, but also pride in resisting US pressure. The economic hit was sharp. Prairie farmers sat on unsold grain. Quebec smelters lost contracts. Ontario auto suppliers faced rising costs. The Canadian dollar wavered, and economists warned of recession. Still, Carney doubled down. Canada must chart its own course, with Europe, with Asia, with partners who respect fair trade. Europe applauded, seeing Canada as a counterweight to Trump's unilateralism. The contrast was clear. Trump framed tariffs as strength through confrontation, while Carney framed resilience through cooperation. The rift widened, with neither side willing to yield. By mid-2025, the conflict hardened into stalemate. Trump floated tariffs up to 35%. Canada deepened EU ties. Talks froze, with neither side conceding. The paradox was stark. Tariffs inflicted pain, but no cooperation, while diversification built resilience but not replacement. After decades of integration, decoupling overnight proved impossible. The deepest fracture was trust. Neighbors once indispensable now saw only obstacles. With no exit plan, the dispute hardened into a costly psychological standoff. Quebec's aluminum belt was hit first. Smelters powering half of US imports saw orders collapse under 25% tariffs. Contracts vanished, layoffs followed, and towns like Saguenay faced crisis. Emergency aid softened the blow, but couldn't replace lost buyers. Prairie farmers also struggled. Wheat and canola, once flowing south, now sat idle. Redirecting to Europe under CETA was possible, but less profitable. Smaller farms absorbed the worst, squeezed between loans and falling prices. Ontario's auto parts industry, long tied to US assembly lines, faced repeated tariff costs as parts crossed borders. Smaller suppliers folded under the pressure. Beyond economics, Canadians felt betrayed. Once steady partners, they now faced hostile US rhetoric. Diversification gained support, but workers bore the immediate pain. The US also paid a price. Automakers relying on Canadian aluminum and parts saw costs spike. GM warned of billions in losses. Ford delayed expansions. SUV prices jumped, deterring buyers. Drug tariffs sparked outrage. Seniors in Michigan and Minnesota, once reliant on cheaper Canadian insulin, faced surging costs. Advocacy groups accused Washington of punishing the vulnerable. Farmers felt retaliation. Wisconsin dairies and Washington apple growers lost access to Canada. Harvests rotted as cooperatives lobbied Congress for aid. Households noticed too. Tariffs lifted prices on everyday goods, from ketchup to appliances. Families tightened budgets, slowing spending. Economists called tariffs a hidden tax, and for many, it was impossible to argue America was winning. The United States and Canada now stand at a precarious crossroads. Decades of integration have given way to suspicion, with tariffs reshaping not just trade flows, but the psychology of partnership. Both governments present their moves as strength, yet neither has found a path that secures lasting stability. For Canada, the pivot toward Europe offers resilience, but cannot erase geography or history. For the US, tariffs may rally political crowds, but they fracture alliances that once underpinned American influence. The costs are real, the benefits uncertain, and the future unsettled. So the continent faces a stark dilemma: remain divided and weakened, or rediscover the strength of cooperation. In the race to shape the future, will North America win together or fail together by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.